In 1775, as the American Revolution ignited, the colonists knew they faced a formidable adversary in the British, especially at sea. The British Navy ruled the oceans, with a massive fleet that dwarfed any American efforts. The fledgling United States didn't even have a true navy yet, just a few ragtag vessels. So they turned to a daring tactic: privateering. But privateering wasn't just about patriotism, it was business. Merchants, sailors, and ship captains could make a fortune by seizing British merchant vessels, cargoes, and supplies. The prize, whatever loot they captured, they'd get a cut, and the rest would aid the war effort. However, to handle the surge of captured prizes and disputes, the Continental Congress knew they needed a system, a legal framework to regulate this private war at sea. This led to the establishment of the first naval courts dedicated to privateering. Privateering, in simple terms, was legalized piracy with patriotic flair. Congress granted letters of marque, official licenses that allowed privately owned American ships to attack British merchant ships legally. It was a way for Congress to give Americans a chance to disrupt British supply lines while providing much-needed supplies to the colonies. Soon enough, the eastern seaboard was alive with activity, with ships setting sail from ports in Massachusetts, New Jersey, Virginia, and the Carolinas. However, with the capture of British prizes came legal complications. Who exactly owned what? How were prizes to be divided? And what about disputes when two or more privateers claimed the same ship? Congress's answer was the creation of naval courts, where these issues could be legally and fairly settled. To understand the necessity of these naval courts, one has to understand the scale and chaos of privateering. By 1777, thousands of privateers were operating out of American ports, and their success was staggering. They disrupted British trade, creating shortages, delays, and a whole lot of frustration for British merchants and the military. As privateering grew, it was clear the rules needed to be clear-cut to avoid internal chaos. Rivalry among American privateers could be intense. If two privateers captured the same ship, disputes could erupt into violent confrontations over who had rightful ownership. And with British ships' values in the tens of thousands of pounds, these weren't minor squabbles. The courts were set up to be efficient and fair, run by judges appointed by the Continental Congress, operating under strict legal guidelines. These naval courts not only validated the claims of privateers, but also set forth regulations on how prizes would be divided among crew members, captains, and investors. The legal precedents established by these courts were groundbreaking for the time. They dealt with international maritime law and helped shape early American naval policy. For privateers, this meant that they knew precisely what percentage of a prize they'd receive, which provided a sense of security that their risks would yield rewards. One notable figure in this era was William Whipple, a prominent leader in naval court reforms. Whipple, a signer of the Declaration of Independence, was appointed by Congress to serve as a judge in the naval courts. His legal acumen and fair-mindedness helped to iron out disputes and ensured that the courts maintained their credibility. Under Whipple and others like him, the courts maintained a delicate balance, rewarding daring privateers while upholding strict standards of legality and accountability. Privateers like John Manly, a captain famous for capturing British ships laden with precious resources, were essentially part of the American war machine. Manly, like many others, relied on naval courts to confirm his captures. In fact, the courts had the authority to award entire ships and their contents to privateers, or even sell off captured goods at auction, where the proceeds would be divided among the crew and government. This was an essential morale booster, especially since the Continental Army was often struggling with funding and resources. The naval courts also handled international cases. When French or Spanish ships, neutral at the time, were inadvertently captured by American privateers, diplomatic incidents could arise. The naval courts would step in to assess whether the capture was legitimate under wartime rules. If not, the cargo was returned, often accompanied by an apology, to avoid international fallout. The court's role in maintaining a level of decorum and legality at sea cannot be underestimated. Their work kept the balance between the lucrative rewards of privateering and the need to avoid conflict with foreign allies or neutrals. Privateering and the naval courts not only helped the American war effort by draining British resources, but also had a significant impact on British strategy. British ships had to be armed more heavily and travel in convoys, which slowed down their voyages and made British goods more expensive. Privateering directly influenced the economic landscape, creating shortages in Britain and affecting the morale of both the British public and troops. Many British captains found themselves outmatched and outgunned by American privateers who had mastered their local waters, utilizing speed, surprise, and an often reckless bravery that made them formidable foes on the high seas. Meanwhile, in Britain, merchant groups and members of Parliament complained loudly about the havoc caused by American privateers. Every captured British ship was a blow to British morale, a reminder that the American colonies, though lacking a traditional navy, could still strike hard and with devastating effect. The British Admiralty attempted countermeasures, including deploying more warships along American trade routes, but the sheer number of privateers meant that protecting every ship was nearly impossible. The naval courts, while focused on prize disputes, also inadvertently served as recruitment motivators. Sailors knew that if they took the risk to sail on a privateer, there was a legitimate system in place to ensure they'd see their share of the spoils. However, privateering and the naval courts weren't without their downsides. Not every privateer was as scrupulous as Congress would have liked. These courts thus maintained a code of conduct even in the fog of war, ensuring that privateering did not spiral into indiscriminate piracy. As the Revolutionary War drew to a close, the legacy of the naval courts and privateering endured. They had set important legal precedents in American maritime law, laying the groundwork for future American naval practices. The success of privateering showed the effectiveness of unconventional warfare tactics and the strategic impact of a strong private navy, insights that would inform U.S. naval strategy for years to come. In summary, the establishment of naval courts for privateering was a landmark decision that allowed America to harness private enterprise for public gain, turning individual ambition into a force for national security. It was a testament to the ingenuity of the Continental Congress, which transformed private self-interest into a strategic asset. Through naval courts, privateering became a regulated, organized, and highly effective way to wage war against the British on the high seas. And while privateering was risky and fraught with challenges, the courts ensured that those who dared to sail under the American flag were rewarded, strengthening the Revolution's fight for independence.